Hey there, time traveler. Tonight, we're slipping into a world that was warm with sand, rich with incense, and deeply obsessed with something you might not expect: sex. The ancient Egyptians didn't blush, they didn't censor, they carved. Their desires in stone, and what they left behind is beautiful, bizarre, and in places utterly disturbing, from temple priestesses who seduce gods, to pharaohs marrying their sisters to keep bloodlines pure, to rituals so strange they blur the line between magic and madness. This civilization turned sex into law, into prayer, and sometimes into punishment. So before we begin, take a second to dim the lights, settle your body, and maybe crack a window, because what you're about to hear is older than shame itself. And hey, if you're new here, subscribe only if you truly enjoy these late night dives into the forgotten and the forbidden. And drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? I read every single one. Now let's step back 3,000 years. To a place where the gods had erections, the dead still demanded lovers. And every grain of sand carried a story someone tried to bury. This is what sex was really like in ancient Egypt. Asterisk, the bedroom of the gods. You step into the tomb of Pharaoh, Ramesses II, and carved into the limestone walls are images that would make modern censors blush. But these aren't pornographic, they're religious. In ancient Egypt, sex wasn't just about pleasure or procreation, it was cosmic, divine, essential to keeping the universe from collapsing into chaos. The ancient Egyptians believed that the god Adam masturbated the world into existence, his ejaculation creating the first gods. Shu and Tefnut, this wasn't blasphemy, it was cosmology. Sexual energy was the force that powered creation itself. When the pharaoh made love, he wasn't just satisfying desire. He was participating in the ongoing creation of reality. You run your fingers along hieroglyphs depicting the fertility god Min, his massive erection prominent and proud. These images weren't hidden away in shame. They were displayed in temples, painted on coffins, carved into public monuments. The Egyptians understood something we've forgotten. Sex was sacred power. But here's what disturbs the modern mind. Children saw these images daily. They grew up understanding that sexual energy was as natural and necessary as the flooding of the Nile. There's no shame, no hiding, no whispered conversations behind closed doors. Sex was woven into the fabric of existence itself as you stand in this tomb. Surrounded by 3,000-year-old erotic art, you begin to realize that everything you thought you knew about ancient sexuality is wrong. The Egyptians had sex practices that would shock us, relationships that would confuse us, and sexual freedoms that we can barely imagine. But what did this mean for ordinary people? How did a farmer's wife in Memphis experience sexuality differently than a modern woman? And why were some sexual acts considered so dangerous that they could literally destroy the world? The marriage bed of commoners. You are Nefertiti, not the famous queen, but a baker's daughter in Thebes. Circa 3050 BCE, you're 12 years old. And today is your wedding day. Your husband, Katie, is 16 and works in the temple granaries. You've never been alone with him, but that's about to change. The wedding ceremony is simple. No priests, no elaborate rituals. Your father hands you to Keti, and you walk together to the small mud brick house that will be your home. The entire village watches as you cross the threshold, because everyone knows what happens next will determine not just your happiness, but your survival. Sex in ancient Egypt wasn't about romance, it was about economics. Your value as a wife depends entirely on your ability to produce sons who will work the fields, support their parents in old age, and perform the burial rituals that ensure safe passage to the afterlife. Without sons, you and your husband face poverty, neglect, and spiritual annihilation. But here's what's different from other ancient cultures. Egyptian women had remarkable sexual autonomy. You own property. You can divorce your husband if he fails to satisfy you sexually. You can even take lovers, as long as you're discreet. The law codes of ancient Egypt are filled with cases of women suing their husbands for sexual neglect. In your wedding bed, as Keti nervously approaches, You realize that unlike women in Greece or Rome, you have power here. The ancient Egyptian love songs, written on papyrus scrolls, describe women as sexual initiators, men as the ones who beg and plead. I am yours like the field that I planted with flowers and with all sorts of fragrant plants. One song reads, but it's the woman speaking to the man, not the other way around. Your wedding night is awkward, fumbling, but not traumatic. Kelly is gentle, even tender. But as you lie together afterward, you can't shake the feeling that something is watching you because in ancient Egypt, the dead never truly leave the living alone. The ghost in the bedroom, you wake up in your marriage bed, but something is wrong. Your husband, Kitty, is sweating, trembling, completely unable to perform sexually. It's been 3 months since your wedding, and this mysterious ailment has made consummation impossible. The village whispers that you've been cursed. But you know the truth is far stranger. In ancient Egypt, the dead were believed to be sexually active. Tombs were equipped with everything the deceased might need in the afterlife, including sex. The wealthy were buried with shabby figures, small statues that would serve as sexual partners in the afterlife. The poor had to make do with masturbation, which was considered a perfectly acceptable form of afterlife recreation. But sometimes the dead got jealous of the living. Letters to the dead, written on papyrus and pottery shards, frequently deal with sexual problems. To my beloved husband, Enkef in Sekhmet, one widow writes, "Why do you torment me? I have not wronged you. Why do you seek to destroy my new marriage?" The dead, it seems, were notoriously possessive lovers. Your mother-in-law suggests a solution that would horrify modern sensibilities. You must have sex in the cemetery. Literally on top of the tomb of Kitty's deceased first wife. This isn't necrophilia, it's spiritual negotiation. By including the dead woman in your sexual relationship, you're acknowledging her continued presence and asking for her blessing. The ritual works that night in the shadow of limestone monuments. You and Ketty finally consummate your marriage. But as you lie together afterward, you hear something that makes your blood freeze. The sound of crying coming from beneath the ground. The dead wife is still there, and she's not happy. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri describe dozens of conditions caused by jealous spirits interfering with sexual function. Doctors prescribe everything from magic spells to crocodile dung suppositories. The line between medicine and magic was non-existent, especially when it came to sex. But the dead weren't the only supernatural threats to your sexual well-being. There were creatures far worse than ghosts lurking in the shadows of ancient Egypt. The demon lovers, you're 6 months pregnant with your first child, and the nightmares have begun. Every night you dream of a creature with the head of a hippopotamus, the body of a crocodile, and the limbs of a lion. It speaks to you in voices that sound like screaming children. And it wants something from you that you can't quite understand. This is Amit, the devourer of hearts. And she's not just a nightmare, she's a sexual predator. Ancient Egyptian demonology describes dozens of entities that feed on sexual energy. Pregnancy and childbirth, they slip into bedrooms like smoke, violate sleeping women, and steal unborn children. The most feared of these creatures is Lamashtu, who appears as a beautiful woman but has the feet of a bird of prey. She seduces men in their dreams, draining their life force through sexual intercourse. Victims wake up exhausted, impotent, and slowly dying. The only protection is to sleep with amulets of the god base, whose grotesque appearance and enormous penis frighten demons away. But demons aren't the only supernatural sexual threat. The ancient Egyptians believed that certain humans could transform into sexual predators through magic. Sorcerers could change their appearance, visit their enemies in dreams, and commit spiritual rape that left no physical evidence but devastating psychological damage. Your husband, Katie, has started wearing a charm around his neck, a small bronze penis inscribed with protective spells. He sleeps with a knife under his pillow and burns incense made from frankincense and myrrh. The smell makes you nauseous, but it's supposed to keep the demons away. The pregnancy makes you vulnerable in ways that modern women can't imagine. In ancient Egypt, the period between conception and birth was considered a time of maximum supernatural danger. Demons could possess unborn children, turning them into monsters. They could steal the baby's soul, leaving you to give birth to an empty shell. As your belly grows larger, you begin to understand that childbirth in ancient Egypt isn't just dangerous physically. It's a spiritual battlefield where the forces of creation and destruction wage war over the soul of your child. The birth pavilion, you're in labor, and the pain is unlike anything you've ever experienced. But the physical agony is nothing compared to the spiritual terror surrounding you. You're in the birth pavilion, a special structure built away from the main house because birth is considered both sacred and contaminating. 7 women attend you, the mystical number that ensures divine protection. Each holds a different amulet. Carved hippos, protective eyes, tiny penises, and figurines of the goddess Taret, who appears as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright. These aren't just good luck charms, they're weapons in a supernatural war. The ancient Egyptians believed that the moment of birth was when demons were most likely to attack. As your cervix dilates, you're creating a portal between worlds, and malevolent spirits can slip through. The midwife chants spells continuously, calling on the gods to protect you and your child from spiritual invasion. But here's what's truly disturbing. If you die in childbirth, you'll become a demon yourself. The ancient Egyptians believed that women who died during labor were transformed into bloodthirsty spirits who would attack other pregnant women. Your soul, twisted by pain and unfulfilled maternal desire, would become a predator stalking the living. The labor lasts 18 hours. You scream, you bleed. You beg the gods for death, but finally, miraculously, you give birth to a son. The midwife examines him carefully, looking for signs of demonic possession, birthmarks in the shape of claws, eyes that don't focus properly, or an inability to cry. Your son appears normal. But the danger isn't over. For the next 40 days, you'll remain in the birth pavilion, isolated from the community. During this time, you're considered spiritually polluted, your milk potentially contaminated by the trauma of birth. Any man who has sex with you during this period will be cursed with impotence. But isolation has its advantages. Away from the judgment of the village, you begin to understand the secret power of motherhood in ancient Egypt. You're no longer just a wife, you're a creator, a channel for the divine forces that bring life into the world. The milk of the gods, you're nursing your son. And the ancient Egyptians believed that what's happening is nothing short of miraculous. Breast milk isn't just nutrition. It's liquid magic, capable of healing diseases, granting immortality, and transforming ordinary humans into gods. The goddess Isis, wife of Osiris and mother of Horus, is depicted throughout Egyptian art nursing her divine child. But these aren't tender maternal scenes. They're powerful magical images. Isis's milk has the power to resurrect the dead, heal the sick, and grant divine powers to mortals. Egyptian queens would often pose as Isis nursing the pharaoh, literally depicting themselves as the source of royal power. Your own milk is believed to have similar, if less dramatic, properties. Mixed with honey and wine, it becomes a love potion, capable of making any man fall hopelessly in love. Applied to wounds, it prevents infection and promotes healing. Fed to other people's children, it can transfer your family's characteristics and even social status. But nursing also makes you sexually unavailable, and this creates a dangerous dynamic in your marriage. Ancient Egyptian men were expected to be sexually active, and a nursing wife couldn't fulfill those needs. Many husbands took concubines during their wives' nursing period, leading to complex household arrangements that would scandalize modern sensibilities. The solution, according to ancient Egyptian custom, was wet nurses. Wealthy families hired other women to nurse their children, freeing the mothers for sexual activity. But this wasn't just about convenience. It was about survival. A sexually unsatisfied husband might divorce his wife, leaving her destitute and socially ruined. Your neighbor, Anki Cinnamon, chose differently. She stopped nursing after 3 months, despite the risk to her child's health. Because her husband was threatening to take a second wife, her baby died of a fever that might have been prevented by continued breastfeeding. But her marriage survived these impossible choices defined women's lives in ancient Egypt. Every decision about sexuality, reproduction, and childcare carries life or death. Consequences, not just for you, but for your entire family. The house of multiple wives. You're now 25 years old. And your husband, Kiri, has just announced that he's taking a second wife. Her name is Mutemwea. She's 14, and she's pregnant with his child under Egyptian law. This is perfectly legal, even expected, but it's about to turn your world upside down. Ancient Egyptian marriage was polygamous, but with strict rules, a man could have multiple wives. But only one could be the great wife who managed the household and held primary legal status. The others were essentially glorified servants, responsible for specific tasks and treated as property rather than partners. Mutemia moves into your house, and the dynamics immediately become toxic. She's young, beautiful, and fertile, everything you were when you first married Kedi. But she's also terrified, homesick, and completely dependent on your goodwill. For survival, the ancient Egyptian advice texts are full of warnings about how co-wives can destroy each other through poison. Magic, or simple psychological warfare, the sleeping arrangements are particularly awkward. Titi rotates between your beds according to a schedule that seems to favor Mutemwea. She's younger, more enthusiastic, and hasn't been worn down by years of childbirth and household management. You find yourself competing with a teenager for your husband's sexual attention and losing, but polygamy also creates opportunities. Egyptian law requires husbands to treat all wives equally, providing the same food, clothing, and shelter. If Katie favors Mutemia too, obviously, you can take him to court. The legal documents from ancient Egypt are full of cases where first wives sued their husbands for unfair treatment of co-wives. More importantly, multiple wives mean multiple sources of income. Mutemia is skilled at weaving, and her textiles can be sold in the market together. You and she might be able to accumulate enough wealth to buy your own property. Giving you independence from Titi's whims, the arrangement is uncomfortable. But it's also pragmatic in a world where women have few legal rights and economic opportunities. Sharing a husband might be better than having no husband at all. The divorce courts. You've had enough after 3 years of polygamous marriage. You're filing for divorce. In ancient Egypt, this isn't just possible. It's surprisingly common. Egyptian women could divorce their husbands for sexual neglect, physical abuse, or simple incompatibility. The legal system actually protected women's rights to sexual satisfaction. The divorce court is held in the temple of Maat, goddess of truth and justice. You stand before a panel of male judges. But Egyptian law requires them to hear your case fairly. You brought witnesses, your mother, your sister, and even Mutemia, who is willing to testify that Kedi has been sexually neglecting both of you. Your case is straightforward. Kedi has failed to provide adequate sexual satisfaction, choosing instead to spend his time with prostitutes in the temple districts. This isn't just about hurt feelings. It's about practical economics. If you're not getting pregnant regularly, you're not fulfilling your primary function as a wife, and your social status is in jeopardy. The judges review the evidence, testimony from witnesses, medical examinations to confirm your sexual neglect, and even magical tests to determine if Kedi has been cursed with impotence. Ancient Egyptian law was surprisingly sophisticated when it came to sexual dysfunction. Recognizing both physical and psychological causes, the verdict is in your favor. You're granted a divorce, along with custody of your son and a portion of the marital property. Kedi is ordered to pay you a monthly allowance, and you're free to remarry, but there's a catch. If you remarry within a year, you forfeit your right to the allowance. The law assumes that sexual desire, not economic necessity, is driving your decision to divorce, walking out of the temple. You feel a freedom that few women in the ancient world ever experienced. You own property, you have income, and you can choose your own sexual partners, but you also realize that your options are limited. As a divorced woman, you're automatically suspect in the eyes of society. The prostitute quarters, you're walking through the temple district of Memphis at sunset, and the air is thick with incense, perfume, and the sound of music. This is where the sacred prostitutes work, and business is booming, but what you're seeing isn't what modern minds would recognize as prostitution. It's religious service. The Temple of Hathor employs dozens of women whose job is to channel the goddess's sexual energy. They're not streetwalkers or desperate women selling their bodies for survival. They're skilled religious practitioners, trained in music, dance, poetry, and the sacred arts of love. Many are from wealthy families choosing this life as a form of spiritual devotion. You watch as a young priest approaches one of the women. She's beautiful, but in an otherworldly way, her eyes are lined with coal, her lips painted with red ochre, her body adorned with jewelry that catches the lamplight. The transaction isn't crude or commercial. They talk, they laugh, they drink wine together. The sex, when it happens, is ritualized, sacred, transformative, but there's another kind of prostitution in ancient Egypt, and it's far darker in the poor quarters of the city. Women sell their bodies out of desperation. They're widows, divorced women, or slaves who have no other options. The customers are rough, the conditions are dangerous, and the risk of disease is constant. The contrast is stark. Sacred prostitutes are honored, protected, and well compensated. Secular prostitutes are despised, vulnerable, and often dead before their 30th birthday. The difference isn't moral, it's about class, connection, and the blessing of the gods. You've been approached by a temple recruiter. Your divorce has made you technically eligible for sacred prostitution, and the money would solve your financial problems. But you'd have to give up your son, dedicating your life entirely to the goddess. The choice is agonizing. Economic security versus maternal love. As you walk home through the narrow streets, you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. The sacred prostitutes have power, but they also have enemies. Not everyone approves of women who use their sexuality as a source of divine authority. The contraception conspiracy. You've decided not to enter the temple service, but you're still a divorced woman with sexual needs. The problem is pregnancy. One unplanned child could ruin your chances of remarriage and economic stability. Fortunately, ancient Egyptian women had access to contraception that was surprisingly effective, if incredibly dangerous. The medical papyri describe dozens of birth control methods: honey and acacia gum inserted into the vagina, crocodile dung suppositories, and complex herbal concoctions that had to be prepared during specific phases of the moon. Some of these actually worked. Acacia gum contains gum arabic, which is mildly spermicidal. Others were probably more dangerous than pregnancy itself. Your friend Nevitt, a midwife, teaches you the secret methods passed down from mother to daughter. The most effective involves a paste made from honey, sodium carbonate, and fermented grain, applied before intercourse. It creates a barrier that prevents conception, but it also causes painful infections, and some women have died from the toxic effects. The most disturbing method involves deliberate physical trauma. Some women would insert sharp objects into their wombs, hoping to prevent implantation. Others would drink poisons that would either prevent pregnancy or cause early miscarriage. The line between contraception and abortion was blurry, and both were incredibly dangerous, but contraception wasn't just about preventing pregnancy. It was about maintaining sexual pleasure without consequences. Egyptian love poetry celebrates women who could enjoy sex without fear of childbirth. These women were seen as almost goddess-like. Possessing the power to separate pleasure from procreation, the herbs and potions come with warnings that chill your blood. Use them too often, and you'll become permanently sterile. Use them wrong, and you'll die in agony. But use them successfully, and you'll have a freedom that most women in the ancient world could only dream of. As you prepare your first batch of contraceptive paste, you realize that you're part of a secret sisterhood of women who refuse to let biology control their destiny. But you also understand that this power comes with a price that might be too high to pay. The aphrodisiac markets. You're in the market district of Alexandria. And the air is thick with the scent of exotic spices, rare herbs, and mysterious powders. This is where the aphrodisiac merchants set up their stalls, selling everything from ground rhinoceros horn to the powdered genitals of sacred animals. Business is booming. Because sexual performance in ancient Egypt isn't just about personal pleasure, it's about survival. The merchant Amenemheb shows you his wares with the enthusiasm of a man who truly believes in his products. Mandrake root, carved into the shape of human figures, is supposed to inspire irresistible lust. Lettuce seeds, sacred to the god Min, are believed to enhance male virility. The most expensive item is a vial of liquid that he claims is the actual semen of the god Adam, collected from a temple in Heliopolis. But these aren't just folk remedies sold to the gullible, the wealthy, and powerful of Egypt regularly consume aphrodisiacs. And the recipes are carefully guarded state secrets. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was said to have used a special perfume that made any man who smelled it fall instantly in love with her. The formula died with her, but perfume makers still try to recreate it. You purchase a small vial of Tears of Isis, a concoction made from blue lotus flowers, wine, and honey. The merchant warned you to use only 3 drops, no more, or the results could be catastrophic. Too much, and you'll experience hallucinations, heart palpitations, and possibly death. But the right amount will supposedly make you irresistible to any man you desire. The science behind these aphrodisiacs is surprisingly sophisticated. Many of the herbs contain compounds that actually do affect sexual function. Yohimbine, arginine, and various alkaloids that dilate blood vessels and increase sensitivity. The ancient Egyptians may not have understood the biochemistry, but they definitely understood the results. Back home, you experiment with the purchase. The effects are subtle but real: increased sensitivity, heightened arousal, and a confidence that makes you feel almost superhuman. But you also notice side effects: dizziness, nausea, and strange dreams filled with erotic imagery. The line between medicine and magic is blurring, and you're beginning to understand that sexuality in ancient Egypt is as much about chemistry as it is about desire. The impotence to your former husband Kiti has been cursed with impotence, and everyone in the village believes you're responsible. The timing is suspicious. Within weeks of your divorce, he became completely unable to perform sexually. His new wife, Mutemwe, is desperate. The village is gossiping, and fingers are pointing directly at you. Magical impotence was a recognized medical condition in ancient Egypt, and the treatments were as bizarre as they were desperate. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes several cases where men lost their sexual function after angering women with magical knowledge. The symptoms were always the same: complete inability to achieve arousal, accompanied by nightmares, loss of appetite, and gradual wasting away. The village priest, Waset, approaches you with an offer that's both terrifying and tempting. He'll publicly clear you of the curse accusations, but only if you'll help him perform a counter curse on Kiti. The ritual involves elements that make your stomach turn: grave, dirt from a suicide victim, menstrual blood from a virgin, and the severed penis of a hanged man. But here's the truth that no one else knows. You didn't curse Keti. His impotence is probably psychological, brought on by guilt over his treatment. Of you during the marriage, the ancient Egyptians understood that sexual function was connected to mental state, but they preferred magical explanations to psychological ones. The real curse is the one you're living under. As a divorced woman accused of witchcraft, you're becoming a social outcast. Men avoid you, women whisper about you, and children throw stones at your house. Your former sexual liberation is turning into a prison of suspicion and fear. You decide to take matters into your own hands. If everyone believes you're a witch, you might as well learn actual magic. The old woman Tarit, who lives at the edge of the village, is known to have real power. She agrees to teach you, but the price is higher than you expected. The education begins with a warning that chills your blood. Once you learn the true secrets of sexual magic, you can never go back to being an ordinary woman. The power will change you, possibly destroy you, but it will also make you untouchable. The Witch's Apprentice. You're learning magic from Torret. And the lessons are nothing like what you expected. Real Egyptian magic isn't about waving wands or muttering incantations. It's about understanding the fundamental forces that govern sexuality, fertility, and death. And it's far more dangerous than near curses. Torret teaches you to read the sexual energy of other people, to see the invisible threads that connect lovers, enemies, and strangers. You learn that sexual desire creates actual magical bonds between people, bonds that can be manipulated, strengthened, or severed. Every person you've ever slept with is still connected to you by these invisible threads. The most disturbing lesson involves necromancy. Torret shows you how to call up the spirits of the dead and compel them to interfere in the sexual lives of the living. The technique requires objects from the grave, hair, fingernails, or small bones. The dead, she explains, are jealous of the living and eager to cause sexual chaos. But the real power lies in understanding the cycles of the body. Torret teaches you to read the subtle signs of ovulation, menstruation, and fertility in other women. With this knowledge, you can predict when marriages will be consummated, when affairs will begin, and when pregnancies will occur. Information is power, and sexual information is the most valuable currency of all. The training is physically exhausting. You fast for days at a time, consume hallucinogenic herbs, and perform rituals that leave you drained and disoriented, but you're also developing abilities that seem impossible. You can sense sexual tension from across a room, predict marital problems before they develop, and even influence other people's desires through subtle manipulation. The most dangerous lesson comes last. Torret teaches you to separate your own soul from your body, allowing you to visit people in their dreams and influence their sexual behavior. The technique is called night flying, and it's considered one of the most powerful forms of magic in ancient Egypt. But there's a price for this power. Each time you use magic, you lose a piece of your humanity. You're becoming something other than human, something that exists between the world of the living and the world of dead. The Dream Rapist. You've mastered the art of dream manipulation. And tonight you're going to test your powers on a target who deserves punishment. Kedi, your former husband, has been spreading rumors about you throughout the village. It's time to show him what real magical power looks like. The ritual begins at midnight. You lie on your bed, but your consciousness separates from your body and flies through the darkness to Kedi's house. You can see him sleeping next to Mutembia, unaware that his dreams are about to become a nightmare. In the dream realm, you appear to Kedi as a seductive woman, but not entirely human. Your eyes glow with an otherworldly light. Your touch burns like fire, and your voice echoes with the sound of screaming winds. You force him to experience sexual desire so intense that it borders on madness, then leave him unsatisfied and desperate. The psychological effects are immediate and devastating. Kedi wakes up exhausted, haunted by dreams he can't quite remember but can't forget. His sexual function deteriorates further, and he becomes paranoid, convinced that invisible enemies are attacking him. The village begins to whisper that he's been cursed by a demon. But dream magic has consequences for the practitioner as well. Each time you enter someone else's dreams, you risk losing pieces of your own identity. You begin to confuse your memories with theirs, your desires with theirs. The line between self and others starts to blur. Worse, you're not the only one with these powers. Other practitioners of dream magic can sense your activities, and some of them don't appreciate the competition. You've entered a shadow war between magical practitioners, fought in the realm of dreams and nightmares. The most terrifying realization comes when you understand that you're losing control. The power to manipulate dreams is beginning to manipulate. You're becoming addicted to the rush of dominating other people's minds. And the addiction is changing your personality in ways that frighten you. As you lie in bed, your consciousness returning to your body. You realize that you've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. You're no longer just a divorced woman trying to survive in ancient Egypt. You're a predator who feeds on the sexual energy of others. The cult of Isis. You're invited to join a secret cult dedicated to Isis, goddess of magic and sexuality. The invitation comes from Nebet, the midwife who taught you about contraception. The cult promises sisterhood, protection, and access to magical knowledge that could make you the most powerful woman in the region. But the initiation ritual is designed to break down everything you think you know about yourself. The ceremony takes place in an underground chamber beneath the temple. Of Isis, 13 women gather in a circle, all naked, all experienced in the magical arts. The air is thick with incense made from frankincense, myrrh, and the burned hair of sacred prostitutes. The smell is intoxicating, hallucinogenic, and completely disorienting. The high priestess Merit explains that the cult's purpose is to channel the sexual energy of Isis to gain power over men, gods, and the forces of nature. But this isn't just about personal empowerment, it's about preparing for the end of the world. The cult believes that chaos is coming, and only women who have mastered the sacred arts of sexuality will survive. The initiation begins with a ritual that would shock modern sensibilities. Each woman must confess her deepest sexual secrets, not just to the group, but to the goddess herself. You describe your experiences with dream magic, your experiments, with contraception and your growing addiction to sexual power. The confessions are recorded on papyrus scrolls that will be preserved in the temple archives. But confession is just the beginning. The real initiation involves a sexual ritual with the statue of Isis herself. The statue has been carved with anatomically correct details, and the ritual requires each initiate to achieve physical climax. While pressed against the cold stone, the experience is supposed to create a permanent magical bond between the woman and the goddess. The psychological effects are profound. You feel a connection to divine power that's unlike anything you've experienced, but you also feel a crushing sense of responsibility. The power comes with obligations to the goddess, to the cult, and to the cosmic order itself. As the ritual concludes, you realize that you've joined something far more serious than a women's support group. You're now part of a secret society that believes it has the power to control the destiny of Egypt itself. The pharaoh's harem, you've been recruited to serve in the harem of Pharaoh Rameses III. And the reality is nothing like what you expected. The harem isn't a pleasure palace where beautiful women wait around for the pharaoh's sexual attention. It's a complex political institution where hundreds of women compete for power, influence, and survival. The harem is located in a vast complex of buildings near Memphis, surrounded by walls that are more like a prison than a palace. The women inside include wives, concubines, and political hostages from conquered territories. Most of them will never see the pharaoh naked, let alone have sex with him. They're bargaining chips in diplomatic negotiations, insurance policies against rebellion, and breeding stock for the royal bloodline. Your sponsor is Tai, one of the pharaoh's minor wives, who has promised to protect you in exchange for your magical services. The harem is full of women who practice various forms of magic, love spells, fertility enhancement, and the more dangerous arts of assassination and political manipulation. Your reputation as a dream manipulator has preceded you, and several women want to hire your services. The sexual dynamics within the harem are complex and often brutal. Women form alliances based on shared interests, ethnic backgrounds, or magical abilities. They also form romantic relationships with each other. Since many of them have little or no access to men, these relationships are tolerated, even encouraged, as long as they don't interfere with the women's primary duty, being available for the pharaoh's pleasure. But the pharaoh himself is a disappointment. Ramesses III is old, sick, and increasingly impotent. His sexual appetites have diminished to the point where he rarely visits the harem at all. The women are essentially imprisoned for the sexual pleasure of a man who no longer desires sex. The real power in the harem belongs to the older women who have survived decades of court intrigue. They control access to the pharaoh, manage the complex hierarchy of wives and concubines, and make life or death decisions about younger women. These women are masters of sexual politics, using their knowledge of desire, fertility, and pleasure as weapons in a constant war for influence. You're beginning to understand that the harem is a microcosm of Egyptian society, where sexuality is always about power, and power is always about survival. The Conspiracy of Queens. You are standing in the shadows of Queen Nefertiti's private chamber in 1340 BCE, watching as she prepares for what may be the most dangerous seduction in Egyptian history. The air is thick with frankincense and myrrh, but beneath the sweet scent lies something far more sinister. The smell of political desperation. Nefertiti's marriage to Akhenaten has produced 6 daughters, but no male heir, and the whispers in the palace corridors speak of a conspiracy that would make even the gods tremble. You witness as Nefertiti's servants apply coal made from ground, beetles and antimony around her eyes, creating the iconic look that will survive millennia. But this isn't merely about beauty, it's about survival. The queen's sexual relationship with her husband has become a weapon in a religious war that threatens to tear Egypt apart. Akhenaten's radical monotheism has made enemies of the powerful priesthood of Amun, and they're watching every move the royal couple makes in their bedchamber. The queen's sexuality has become entangled with statecraft in ways that would horrify modern sensibilities. You observe as she receives reports from her network of female spies women who use their bodies to gather intelligence from high-ranking officials. These aren't prostitutes or courtesans, but noble ladies who have been trained in the arts of seduction as a matter of national security. One such woman, Lady Kia, has been tasked with determining whether the Vizier Ai is plotting against the throne by studying his sexual habits and pillow talk. As you watch, Nefertiti herself prepares for a calculated encounter with a foreign diplomat, whose allegiance could determine Egypt's fate. The queen's body has been prepared with oils containing actual gold dust, believed to make her irresistible to any man. Her servants have inserted small carved ivory figures of the god Min into her vagina, practice meant to ensure divine favor during the encounter. The physical discomfort must be excruciating, but the queen's face remains serene. The most disturbing element of this royal conspiracy involves the queen's own daughters. You learn that Nefertiti is secretly training her eldest daughter, Meritaten, in the same arts of political seduction. At barely 14, the princess is being prepared to marry her own father if necessary to secure the succession. The ancient Egyptian acceptance of royal incest has twisted into something far darker, a sexual chess game where even children are pawns. The conspiracy reaches its climax when you discover that Nefertiti has been secretly meeting with representatives of the old priesthood, the price of their support. The queen must publicly humiliate her husband by taking a lover from among his enemies. The sexual act itself will be performed in front of witnesses, recorded by scribes, and used as evidence of Akhenaten's inability to control his household and therefore his kingdom. You realize that what you're witnessing isn't just political maneuvering, but the complete weaponization of female sexuality in service of power. The queen's body has become a battlefield where the fate of monotheism itself will be decided. Every caress, every whispered endearment, every moment of apparent intimacy is calculated to serve a larger purpose that has nothing to do with love or desire. As the night deepens, you sense that this conspiracy will end in blood. The queen's sexual politics have set in motion forces that will consume not just her marriage, but potentially the entire 18th dynasty. Yet, something about the way she catches her reflection in the polished copper mirror suggests she knows exactly what she's doing. The question haunts you as you prepare to witness the aftermath. What happens when the most powerful woman in Egypt decides that her sexuality is worth more than her soul? The necrophilic nightmare. You are descending into the tomb of Komozet, son of Rameses II, in 1250 BCE, carrying a torch that casts dancing shadows on walls covered in hieroglyphs that seem to writhe in the flickering light. The stench hits. You first, not the clean, dry smell of properly mummified bodies, but something wet, rotting, and obscenely sweet. What you're about to witness represents the darkest intersection of death and sexuality in ancient Egyptian culture. A practice so horrifying that even the tomb robbers whisper about it in hushed tones. Your guide, a disgraced priest named Amenemheb, leads you deeper into the labyrinthine passages. He explains that you're about to see evidence of the most forbidden practice in Egyptian society, one that carries the death penalty not just for the perpetrator, but for anyone who fails to report it. The ancient Egyptians believed that the dead could still experience physical sensations, including sexual pleasure, which made certain violations not just criminal, but cosmically dangerous. The first chamber you enter contains the mummy of a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, whose linen wrappings have been carefully unwound around her pelvic area. The preservation is so perfect that you can see the details of her body with disturbing clarity. Amenemheb explains that she was the wife of a minor official who died in childbirth 6 months ago. Someone has been visiting her regularly, leaving behind evidence of sexual activity that makes your stomach turn. The mummy's position has been altered, her legs spread, her hands positioned in ways that suggest ongoing abuse. You learn that this isn't an isolated incident. The practice of necrophilia in ancient Egypt wasn't just the domain of disturbed individuals. It was sometimes tied to religious beliefs about resurrection and fertility. Certain cult followers believe that sexual union with the dead could grant them eternal life or bring the deceased back to the world of the living. But god Osiris himself was said to have conceived Horus with Isis after his death, providing a mythological justification for these horrific acts. The second chamber reveals something even more disturbing, a collection of mummified children, all between the ages of 8 and 12, showing signs of sexual violence both before and after death, the careful positioning of their bodies, the ritual objects placed between their legs, the papyrus scrolls describing their sacred marriages. To the god of the underworld, all of it points to an organized cult that has been operating within the highest levels of Egyptian society. Amenemheb shows you a series of papyrus documents that record the marriages of these dead children to wealthy patrons who believe that sexual contact with the deceased will grant them power over death itself. The prices paid for these encounters are staggering enough gold to buy a small palace, precious stones worth more than most people see in a lifetime, rare spices imported from the far reaches of the empire. The economics of necrophilia have created a thriving underground market that reaches into every level of society. The most horrifying revelation comes when you discover that some of these acts are being committed by the embalmers themselves. The process of mummification, which takes 70 days, provides ample opportunity for abuse. You see evidence that certain embalmers have been modifying the mummification process to preserve the sexual organs in ways that make postmortem violation easier. They've created a grotesque industry where the dead are prepared specifically for sexual exploitation. As you examine a papyrus scroll detailing the beliefs of this death cult, you realize that they see themselves as priests of a forgotten god one, who demands sexual sacrifice from both the living and the dead. The scroll describes rituals where living participants engage in sexual acts with mummified corpses while chanting prayers that are supposed to grant them immortality. The combination of religious fanaticism and sexual perversion has created something that defies comprehension. The torch is burning low as you prepare to leave this chamber of horrors. But one final detail stops you cold. On the wall, painted in what appears to be human blood, is a calendar marking the dates of future ceremonies. The next one is scheduled for tomorrow night, and the victim has already been chosen, a young scribe who died mysteriously just 3 days ago. You realize that what you've witnessed isn't just historical horror, it's an ongoing nightmare that continues to claim new victims in the darkness beneath the sands. The last orgy of Cleopatra. You are reclining on silk cushions in the great hall of Cleopatra's palace in Alexandria. 30 BCE, as the last pharaoh of Egypt prepares for what she knows will be her final feast. The air is heavy with the scent of lotus blossoms and opium smoke, and the sounds of desperate celebration echo through corridors that will soon be filled with Roman soldiers. What you're about to witness isn't just a party, it's a carefully orchestrated sexual ritual designed to ensure that Egyptian culture dies in a blaze of defiant excess rather than submission to Roman rule. Cleopatra appears before you draped. In nothing but gold chains and emeralds, her body painted with symbols that tell the story of Egypt's sexual mythology. Each hieroglyph has been applied with paint made from crushed pearls and the blood of sacred animals, creating a living manuscript of erotic wisdom that will die with her. The queen's sexuality has always been political, but tonight it transcends. Politics to become something approaching the divine, a final act of creation before the inevitable destruction. The guests surrounding you represent the last flowering of Egyptian aristocracy. Priests, scholars, artists, and nobles who have chosen to join their queen in this ultimate celebration rather than live under Roman rule. You watch as couples engage. In acts that blur the line between worship and debauchery, their bodies intertwined in positions that mirror the sacred sculptures found in the temples of Dendera. This isn't mere hedonism, it's a religious experience where sexual ecstasy becomes a form of prayer. The centerpiece of the evening is a massive golden statue of Isis, her body designed with hidden chambers that release aphrodisiac incense when touched in certain places. You observe as participants take turns embracing the goddess, their bodies becoming part of a living tableau that represents the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The statue's eyes are made from huge sapphires that seem to watch everything with divine approval, blessing the sexual chaos unfolding. Before them, Cleopatra herself moves through the crowd like a goddess among mortals, selecting partners not for pleasure but for symbolic significance. You watch as she couples with a Nubian prince, their union representing the marriage of Egypt and Africa. Then with a Greek philosopher, symbolizing the joining of wisdom and power. Each encounter is witnessed by scribes who record every detail, creating a final testament to Egyptian sexual culture that will be hidden away before the Romans arrive. The most disturbing aspect of this final orgy is the presence of the children, not as participants, but as witnesses to what Cleopatra believes is their cultural inheritance. Young princes and princesses, some no older than 10, stand at the edges of the celebration, their eyes wide with understanding that this is their last glimpse of the world they were born to rule. The queen has decided that they should see the beauty of their culture's sexual freedom before Roman prudishness crushes it forever. As the night progresses, you notice that many of the participants are weeping even as they reach the heights of physical pleasure. They know that sunrise will bring the end of 3,000 years of Egyptian independence, and their tears mix with sweat and wine in a cocktail of grief and defiance. The sexual acts become more desperate, more inventive, as if the participants are trying to compress a lifetime of forbidden pleasures into a single night. The climax comes when Cleopatra announces that she will conceive one final child, not with any man, but with Egypt itself, in a ritual that combines ancient fertility magic with theatrical spectacle. She lies with a ceremonial golden phallus while a crowd chants prayers to Hathor. The symbolism is clear. This last act of creation will produce not a child, but a legend that will outlive the Roman Empire itself as dawn breaks over Alexandria. You realize that what you've witnessed isn't just the end of a dynasty. It's the transformation of history into myth. The sexual excesses of this final night will be whispered about for centuries, creating a legend of Cleopatra that will prove more powerful than any army. The queen's final gambit isn't military or political. It's sexual and therefore eternal. The eternal echo. You are standing in the ruins of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in 2024, running your fingers along stone carvings that have survived nearly 4,000 years. Their erotic imagery is still capable of shocking modern visitors. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across hieroglyphs, that tell stories of sexual practices so advanced, so psychologically sophisticated, that contemporary sexologists are still trying to understand them. What you've witnessed throughout this journey through ancient Egyptian sexuality hasn't just been history. It's been a preview of humanity's eternal struggle with desire, power, and mortality. The echoes of ancient Egypt's sexual culture reverberate through every aspect of modern life in ways that would astonish the contemporary world. The Egyptian invention of reliable contraception using crocodile dung and honey laid the groundwork for reproductive freedom that wouldn't be matched again until the 20th century. Their understanding of female sexuality, documented in medical papyri that described the clitoris with scientific precision, was more advanced than European knowledge would be for the next 3 millennia. You realize that the sexual frankness you've witnessed throughout this journey represents something that modern society has largely lost: the integration of sexuality into every aspect of human experience. The ancient Egyptians didn't compartmentalize sex as a separate, shameful aspect of life. Instead, they wove it into their religion, their politics, their art, and their understanding of the cosmos itself. The result was a culture that could produce both the sublime beauty of the love poems of the New Kingdom and the horrific extremes of necrophilic cults. The most profound legacy of Egyptian sexuality lies not in its successes, but in its recognition. That sexual energy is the fundamental force of creation. Modern physics speaks of energy that can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed, a principle that ancient Egyptian priests understood intuitively. They saw sexual desire as a manifestation of the same cosmic force that made the Nile flood, the sun rise, and the dead return to life. This understanding allowed them to approach sexuality with a combination of reverence and pragmatism that feels almost alien to contemporary sensibilities. The political weaponization of sexuality that you witnessed in the courts of pharaohs has never truly ended. From Cleopatra's strategic seductions to modern political sex scandals, the intersection of power and desire continues to shape human civilization. The difference is that ancient Egyptians acknowledged this reality openly, while modern societies prefer to pretend that politics and sexuality exist in separate spheres. The result is that we're often blindsided by revelations that would have surprised no one in ancient Memphis. Perhaps most importantly, the Egyptian understanding of sexuality as a force that transcends death continues to influence human psychology in ways we're only beginning to understand. The pharaoh's belief that sexual energy could literally conquer mortality lives on in everything from modern fertility treatments to the sexual imagery that permeates contemporary discussions of life extension and artificial intelligence. The ancient Egyptian dream of using sex to achieve immortality has become a recurring theme in science fiction, genetic engineering, and transhumanist philosophy. The darkness you've witnessed, the child marriages, the necrophilia, the sexual slavery serves as a reminder that the integration of sexuality into culture can produce profound evil as well as transcendent beauty. The same society that created the world's first known contraceptives also normalized practices that would be considered criminal today. This paradox forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature that purely progressive or purely conservative worldviews struggle to address. As you prepare to leave the temple, you notice that modern tourists are still drawn to the erotic carvings with the same fascination that has captivated visitors for millennia. The ancient Egyptian understanding of sexuality as a fundamental force of existence continues to resonate because it speaks to something essential about human experience. We are still the same species that built these temples, still driven by the same desires that motivated the pharaohs, still searching for ways to transform sexual energy into something transcendent and eternal. The weird history of ancient Egyptian sexuality reveals that we haven't progressed as far as we like to imagine. We've simply learned to hide our contradictions better, to separate our desires from our ideals, to compartmentalize our humanity into acceptable and unacceptable categories. The ancient Egyptians, for all their flaws, lived as integrated beings who understood that sexuality, spirituality, and mortality are not separate aspects of existence, but different expressions of the same fundamental force. That understanding, preserved in stone and papyrus, continues to challenge us to examine our own assumptions about what it means to be human and what it might mean to transcend humanity altogether.